Oh, my sweet Carolina, what compels me to go? Oh, my sweet disposition, may you one day carry me home.
Look away, the old Dixie song says. Looking back now, some 40 years of time has receded into the past of my travels from Richmond to Gettysburg and all about the theater of General Lee's operations in the war. Each trek I took, I found the landscape changed. A farm field now filled with residential lots, an ancient wagon road taking you across the Rappahannock at Henson's Mill, now paved with asphalt and blocked with a gate at the end. Sleepy, almost abandoned towns like Culpeper, bursting now with newcomers, young people working in Washington, filling these new restaurants at night. Cheap family campgrounds in the Blue Ridge Mountains turn into exclusive resorts for the rich. Just a reflection of the reality that the passage of time means change. Change in the landscape, change in the use of the land, change in the people's interest in its past, in the history of what happened in it as the generations changed. On my first experience, following the old roads General Lee's army marched on to reach the battlefields, I was coming back south from Gettysburg, rolling down West Virginia's Old Valley Pike, then a two-lane Highway 11 heading for Middleburg and the Red Fox Inn with Patty, when I saw coming up a great column perched on the shoulder of the road. So I pedaled the horse to a stop in front of it and stepped out to look. It was a simple construction, a square block with a bronze tablet as its base, upon which the column, about 8 feet in height, was capped, with a plate upon which was arranged three 24-pounder cannonballs. The inscription on the tablet explained the column marked a place. James Johnson Pettigrew of North Carolina had been taken by wagon from Falling Waters, where he had been mortally wounded in the retreat from Gettysburg. The tablet informed that some 50 yards down the dirt road in front of it, intersecting with the pike, was the farmhouse where Pettigrew had died. The house belonged to a farmer named Boyd, who owned 40 acres, a strip of land between the Opagan River to the west and the Pike as it passes through the village of Bunker Hill. According to the family tradition, Pettigrew's ancestors were French Protestants who immigrated to Scotland sometime in the 17th century. A member of the family, James Pettigrew, ended up in Ireland, and by the end of the century he found his way to Pennsylvania in 1740, and by 1760 he appeared in North Carolina with 13 children. Among these was Pettigrew's grandfather, Charles Pettigrew, who became an Anglican minister. Charles married into a wealthy family and used the connection to acquire 1,000 acres of swampland bordering Phelps Lake, which he developed with African labor into 2 plantations. These, his eldest son Ebenezer inherited in about 1800. Ebenezer had 3 sons. James J. Pettigrew, born in 1828, was the youngest. He grew up in the style of wealth the planter class enjoyed, though the house he lived in was a humble one compared to the great mansions lining the banks of the Mississippi River in Louisiana. In 1843, at the age of 15, Pettigrew entered the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. It appears from the record that Pettigrew excelled at his coursework, but presented as an introverted person, shy, aloof, with few friends. Pettigrew graduated from Chapel Hill in 1847 and obtained a position with the National Observatory at Washington as an astronomer. 6 months later, in 1848, Pettigrew resigned his position and began the study of law in the Baltimore office of Chief Justice Roger Taney's son-in-law, James Campbell. In July 1848, Ebenezer died, leaving one of his plantations, Bona Arba, to his oldest son Charles, and the other, named Magnolia, to his second son William. James received a cash settlement of $12,000 and ownership of one African named Demer, whose labor he rented to William. In 1849, James moved to Charleston and entered the law office of his cousin, Louis Pettigrew, who was the leading lawyer of the state at that time. A year later, James sailed for Europe and did not return until 1852, traveling through Germany, Italy, Spain, and eventually ending up in the glorious city of Paris. Returning to Charleston in 1852, James resumed the practice of law with his cousin, continuing the practice in that city until the war broke out in 1860. In December 1860, with South Carolina now out of the Union, Pettigrew became colonel of the 1st Regiment of South Carolina. In July 1861, he was appointed colonel of the 22nd North Carolina Regiment. He was 33 years old. 9 months later, having spent the time in camp near Fredericksburg, in March 1862, Pettigrew was promoted to the rank of brigadier general when his regiment was incorporated into a new brigade, and it was sent to Richmond in anticipation of McClellan's appearance on the Yorktown Peninsula. 2 months later, in May 1862, with McClellan now bridging the Chickahominy and advancing toward Richmond on the line of the York River Railroad, Pettigrew's brigade, now part of Whiting's division, got engaged with the enemy at Fair Oak Station. Pettigrew, in the course of it, was toppled from his horse when a spray of bullets struck him. One ball pierced his throat, severing an artery. Another struck his right arm, another a leg. An officer of a Georgia regiment came to Pettigrew's side and stopped the flow of blood with a rag, probably saving his life. Other soldiers gathered around him, intending to carry him out of the range of the enemy fire, but he ordered them back to the front line, and they left him there as the battle raged. Sometime later, the Confederates fell back under the pressure of the enemy's launching a counterattack. Next morning, June 1, Union soldiers came upon Pettigrew's body, realized he was alive, and carried him to a farmhouse in the Union rear. In August 1862, Pettigrew, held as a prisoner of war at Fort Delaware, was exchanged for a Union officer, and though only partially recovered from his injuries, he never regained the full use of his right arm. He was returned to duty in command of a brigade posted at Petersburg. The brigade was composed of North Carolina troops, the 1st, 11th, 44th, and 26th North Carolina regiments. The fall and winter passed, with the brigade guarding the railroads between Petersburg and Wilmington. As the spring of 1863 came on, Pettigrew was ordered to join his brigade with Heth's division, which then was on the march from Chancellorsville toward the Blue Ridge. On July 1, 1863, East Division marched toward Gettysburg on the Cashtown Pike. That afternoon, Pettigrew's brigade came into action against the Iron Brigade entrenched on McPherson's Ridge. There, the brigade encountered the enemy's first line, smashed it, causing its collapse, and drove it back across Willoughby's Run toward Seminary Ridge, where the enemy absorbed into the second line. In 20 minutes of fighting, taking heavy casualties, Pettigrew's North Carolinians drove this line off the ridge, pushing them into Gettysburg. The effort was expensive. The 26th North Carolina alone suffered over 380 dead and wounded in the encounters. Heath, the division commander, was wounded. Then came the third day of the battle, and Pettigrew's great moment of fame. Here, let's have the Buffs tell us what happened.
The fighting here on day one of the Battle of Gettysburg has been largely overlooked, or at least overshadowed to some extent. But the fact of the matter is, the regiments that fought in the area of McPherson's Ridge and Herbst Woods were absolutely decimated. And one of those regiments was the 26th North Carolina Infantry. Here's the monument to the 26th. Again, was in somewhere in this general area. Panning to my right, and here is the general area of the 24th Michigan. Again, they were probably positioned a little closer to this area here. So I moved just a little farther back just to kind of keep painting the picture for you here. So the 26th North Carolina positioned on our left, 24th Michigan in this general area. And again, these two sides were just delivering death blows essentially into each other's faces. I've read accounts that were as little as 20 to 30 yards apart. I've also read accounts about 40 paces apart. So it's probably a very similar distance. And keep in mind, both sides are using rifled muskets here, and the effective range on a rifled musket is a couple hundred yards. So now just imagine being 20 to 30 yards apart from each other, and you're essentially just firing into each other's faces here. Now, despite the heavy casualties suffered by the 26th North Carolina, their numbers were slowly beginning to beat back the men of the 24th Michigan here. So the 24th Michigan began to waver and pull back into an additional line within the Herbst Woods here. 6th North Carolina began to gain the momentum here. Colonel Burgoyne would grab the 26 colors. Now, we already know what kind of target that makes you here. So seeing this, Private Frank Honeycutt would reach for Colonel Burgoyne in the colors. And just as he was doing it, Colonel Burgoyne would turn to hand the colors to Honeycutt when Colonel Burgoyne was struck in the chest by a Union minie ball. Moments later, Private Frank Honeycutt would be struck by a Union minie ball, killing him instantly. So the killing here didn't matter what rank you were. If you were the brigade commander, the regimental commander, a private, a corporal, or sergeant, the lead in the air here did not discriminate, and Colonel Burgwin, at 21 years old, would be killed in action right here in this general area on July 1st of 1863.
The Lord's will be done. We have gained the greatest victory in the war. I have no regret at my approaching death. I fell in the defense of my country. Colonel Henry Burgwin, 26th North Carolina.
Something else I want to hit on is, back in this area, you have the 19th Indiana and the 11th North Carolina duking it out. So the 11th North Carolina began enveloping the 19th Indiana, they began pulling back, and in turn, the 24th Michigan began giving way under the weight of the 26th North Carolina, and the Iron Brigade would begin pulling back into the Herbst Woods here, and pursuing them was the 26th North Carolina, surging forward.
We raised a cheer, and the Yankee line gave way. We charged to the top of the hill where we found another line, which we charged. Captain Thomas Cureton, 26th North Carolina.
I've read in some areas that the 24th Michigan, as they were pulling back, made as many as 8 separate stands in the Herbst Woods here. I don't know exactly if it was that many, but as the 24th was pulling back, no doubt they would reform, maybe on some high ground, just like this we're coming to, and deliver a few more volleys and then continue pulling back. But remember, the 19th Indiana has essentially faltered, so the 24th was unsupported, hence why they are now pulling back, and they've also been engaged here for several hours. So here we are, the 26th North Carolina. We're driving back the Union. We suffered heavy casualties, but yet our superior numbers are giving us the advantage, and we're driving them back. 14 men held the regimental colors in this fight. That was probably about an hour in so far. 14 men grabbed the colors, and 14 men would fall, killed or wounded. And yet, more men would pick those colors up. No matter how many men went down, there was always another guy there to pick up the flag. And it's just remarkable to me. 26 is driving through this area. We just lost our 2nd regimental commander in the matter of minutes here. And over this hill, we don't exactly know what's waiting for us, but yet we are still advancing. So we've made our way out of the Herbst Woods here. So we started in this general direction, made our way out of the Herbst Woods, and this area is the general location of where General Reynolds was killed. We are standing in the location where the 151st Pennsylvania would be brought up from their reserve position at the seminary, just back here. So the Iron Brigade was pulling back out of the Herbst Woods here. Okay, so they're pulling back. Biddle's Brigade on the ridge behind me was pulling back, so a gap was being created. So the 151st Pennsylvania was brought up. So panning to my left, 26th North Carolina. Continuing in this general direction, you had the 11th North Carolina, and then the rest of Pettigrew's brigade off in that direction here. So the 151st Pennsylvania, whose enlistments would be up in less than a month at the Battle of Gettysburg here, was brought up, and they were essentially mauled for the sake of buying some time for the Union to build a defense around the seminary in this direction here.
Oh, my sweet Carolina, what compels me to go? Oh, my sweet disposition, may you one day carry me home.
So we are currently walking along probably the most well-known ground at the Gettysburg battlefield. Now, on the morning of July 3rd of 1863, the men of the 26th North Carolina could barely muster 250 to 300 men. So think about 2 days prior, they came into this battle with almost 900 men. And now, after fighting on July 1st, they can barely muster 300. And they're getting ready to assault over this open field under the barrage of Union artillery and take part in what would become known as Pickett's Charge. We're looking at here is the famed copse of trees. Here's your stone wall, and there's the infamous angle.
The enemy's artillery opened on us with grape, canister, but our lines crossed the lane in splendid order. When about 200 yards from their works, the musketry opened on us, but nothing daunted our brave men, who pressed quickly forward. Captain Thomas Cureton, 26th North Carolina.
So right now we are looking at the infamous angle here at Gettysburg. And right here, you had a small band of Confederates break through the Union line here. Now, as this was unfolding, Cushing's battery here, the men of the 26th were advancing right into the muzzles of the 1st Rhode Island battery here. Now, this monument here, that is the monument to the 26th North Carolina. But let's think about something real quick. We touched on a little earlier that these 26 can barely muster 300 men on the morning of July 3rd. And all right here, that's where they started their charge from. So think about, they're under murderous artillery fire all the way through this area. And now, once we cross the Emmitsburg Road and start ascending up to the Union lines here, we're under small arms fire. And just look at the crossfire that these poor men would have been in. Remember, you have all Union troops all over here, hand-to-hand fighting. No doubt some men are firing into our flank. The 1st Rhode Island battery to our front. I believe the 12th New Jersey and another sharpshooter unit along with the 14th Connecticut are holding this area of the line. And the men of the 26th North Carolina made it within feet of the Union line here.
General Pickett. Sir, you may reform to the rear of this ridge and set up a defensive position. General Pickett, sir, you must look to your division.
General Lee, I have no division.
We've come too far to go back home. Don't lie to me, Carolina. Look at what we have become. There's a song that they sing in the land of the free, while we stand with our heads on our hearts. Oh, the words that we weave to our world as it bleeds. Soldiers in line for the march. Carolina, there's blood on the hands of the damned.
It's Exploring John. Today we're in Bunker Hill, West Virginia. We're looking at the monument to General Pettigrew that was erected here in 1918 to mark the site of his death. As we look at the monument here, we can see it's all laid out. It's been hit by a truck and knocked over. Hopefully at some point in time it'll be re-erected. It's a shame it stood here over 100 years and then just now was destroyed. Due west of this tablet, 650 feet, is the Boyd House, in which died July 17, 1863, Brigadier General James Johnson Pettigrew of North Carolina, CSA. At Gettysburg, he commanded and led Heath's division in the assault on Cemetery Ridge, July 3rd. And in the retreat was mortally wounded at Falling Waters, July 14, 1863. He was a brave and accomplished officer and gentleman. His loss will be deeply felt by the country and the Army. R.E. Lee. Erected 1918 by the North Carolina Historical Commission and the North Carolina Division, UDC. This is one of the tall monuments that were in the county. It wasn't the tallest, but it was maybe second or third. You can see the depressions here on top, and it had cannonballs sitting up there. As we look down the driveway, we can see the Boyd House at the end of the lane. This is where he died. So that's the end of our report here in Bunker Hill. See you next time.
Another Confederate monument came down in Raleigh today. At daybreak, crews picked up where protesters left off Friday night, dismantling the 75-foot statue piece by piece on orders from the governor. WRL's Micaiah Thurman spoke with people who came out to watch the historic moment.
After Governor Cooper's order to remove Confederate monuments for the safety of residents, this memorial in Union Square soon became no more.
I think you can feel it in the pulse of our nation right now. I think this is definitely not just a moment.
Controversial statue in downtown Graham will stay where it is. In 2021, the NAACP filed a lawsuit to remove this Confederate statue standing in front of the old Alamance County Courthouse. 3 years later, the North Carolina Court of Appeals rejected arguments to remove it. Former Alamance County NAACP President Barrett Brown says they argued it posed a threat to public safety, was a misuse of taxpayer dollars, and violated the state constitution.
Well, there were a swath of Confederate statues put up in the 20s after Reconstruction ended, and they were put up as an intimidation factor to keep people from registering and voting, to let people know that the cause of the South would continue to live on.
On Tuesday, the State Court of Appeals ruled that the monument was protected by the Monuments Protection Law the State General Assembly passed in 2015, which says state, city, and county-owned monuments can't be removed without the State Historical Commission's approval. Some community members feel it should be taken down anyways.
I think that they should reconsider and they should listen to the people who live here and take our opinions.
Others believe we should keep the statue as a reminder of our history.
So, like, my grandkids will, understand, because I'm a grandmother and I got little grandchildren, and, you just can't eradicate it and get rid of it, because we have to learn from all of our mistakes.
From demonstrations turning deadly in Charlottesville to right here in North Carolina, activists ripping down a Confederate monument. In the New South, old wounds haven't healed.
Ed, what do you think of when you walk by those monuments? What thoughts go through your mind?
Well, I'm a retired Army chaplain, and I think about the soldiers. They do not, in my opinion, honor white supremacy. They're monuments to the soldiers.
I think they're symbols of oppression and white supremacy, and that is part of my family history, and that I have ancestors who fought for the Confederacy, which was fighting to keep people enslaved. But I'm not proud of that.
We talked to both sides in North Carolina this morning, where there's another flashpoint. The state's Historical Commission now deciding if 3 Confederate monuments on the Capitol grounds should be removed. UNC history professor William Sturkey says they were put up during the racist Jim Crow era.
They placed them in places of prominence all over the South in order to celebrate the present that they had created, but then also to celebrate the future that they had created, which was a modern white supremacist society in the American South.
At a public meeting, most spoke in favor of keeping the monuments where they are.
Those monuments mean everything to me.
A North Carolina law severely restricts moving monuments, saying they can only be relocated to places of similar prominence. According to a 2017 poll, 59% of North Carolinians believe the monuments should remain where they are. 29% want them taken down.
To me, moving the monuments is simply a correction of the telling of history and creating a Capitol grounds that are more welcoming.
Are you sympathetic to those who are deeply offended, who see the symbolism in a different way than you do?
When I hear people say that, I ask them, let's go sit down over a cup of coffee and let's discuss this. I love to understand someone else's history. I want them to understand mine.
So here we are in 2018 in the New South. Can we ever move past this emotional controversy?
I think we can. I hope we can. I believe the monuments will come down eventually.
Ed, will we ever get past this?
I think we are beginning to get past it, and we are a long way past it.
There have to be people who have a clear vision, like John Lewis and Martin Luther King Jr., to have a vision that, yes, we can live in a society where race isn't so divisive. And of course, one of the ways that we reconcile with that truth is, I think, to remove monuments erected by white supremacists in order to invest more fully in our children's future so that they're not having the same discussions that here we are 150 years later still having.
Ashanti Empire was one of the most powerful states in West Africa, but behind the gold, pageantry, and royal pride was a brutal system of exploitation. The Ashanti didn't just trade with Europeans, they waged war to supply them with captives. The empire rose to power in the early 1700s, after defeating the Denkira at the Battle of Fayez in 1701. Before their fall, the Denkira had dominated the region since the early 1600s, controlling trade routes and selling captives to European merchants in exchange for firearms. But to truly understand how this system began, we need to go back even further to the late 1400s, when the Portuguese first arrived on the West African coast and began forming alliances with coastal Akan states. These early relationships laid the foundation for a trade in gold and eventually people that would transform the region for centuries. In 1482, they built Elmina Castle, the first permanent European fort in West Africa, with the cooperation of Fante leaders who controlled the coastal trade routes at the time. The Fante and other coastal peoples were not as centralized or militarily organized as interior empires like Benin and Songhai, which had long-standing political systems and professional armies. This made them more accessible and more easily influenced by European powers. In the beginning, these captives came from far beyond the forest belt, taken in wars, raids, or through tribute systems across the Sahel and Savannah. Muslim and Mande-speaking traders played a central role, moving through ancient empires like Mali and Songhai. They brought enslaved people down from the upper Niger Basin, northern Ghana, Burkina Faso, and eastern Guinea. Some were marched hundreds of miles toward the coast, where they were sold to local rulers or directly to European forts like Elmina. At this time, most coastal kingdoms were not yet slave raiders themselves. They acted as middlemen, profiting from the exchange of gold, ivory, and human beings. But this changed rapidly as the Portuguese and Dutch began trading firearms, creating an arms race that escalated internal conflicts and shifted the balance of power. To keep up, many states began building larger armies and militarizing, often capturing and selling rivals to obtain more weapons and strengthen their forces. The Denkira Empire was the earliest major inland power. One of its most powerful rulers, Nanaboa Amponsam I, built the empire's dominance. He established control over the southern goldfields and centralized Denkira's authority, turning it into the main inland supplier to Portuguese and Dutch traders at Elmina. Under his reign, Denkira gained access to European firearms, which he used to crush rival states and extract tribute. As the slave trade expanded, Denkira began enslaving tributary populations by selling captives to European merchants in exchange for more firearms. His reign set the foundation for Denkira's dominance and the brutality that came with it. Through their access to gold, Denkira became the primary supplier to the Portuguese and, later, the Dutch, who took Elmina in 1637. The Dutch dealt directly with Denkira elites in exchange for gold and firearms, which Denkira used to subjugate neighboring Akan states, including the early Ashanti clans. Meanwhile, Akwamu, a neighboring Akan state, rose in the late 1600s by controlling riverine and overland routes that connected the inland to the slave coast. King Ansa Sasraku I was determined to expand the kingdom's reach by arming his military with European firearms. He struck trade deals with the Dutch and later the British, securing guns and gunpowder in exchange for enslaved captives. Akwamu launched aggressive campaigns to capture people, selling them to the Dutch and later the British. They dealt directly with European merchants at coastal posts like Accra and gained military strength through gun trading. The Fante, another rival Akan state, lived along the coast and played an early intermediary role. They were not as centralized, but became critical facilitators between Europeans and inland states. Over time, their alliance with the British allowed them to rise in power, block inland access, and become rivals to both Denkira and Ashanti. These kingdoms fought each other over control of trade routes, access to European goods, and the power to extract tribute or captives from weaker neighbors. Wars were not just political, they were economic, driven by the opportunity to sell enemies into slavery. Yes, they were selling each other to Europeans. Akwamu sold captives from rival states. Denkira enslaved tributaries. Fante raided and sold enemies inland. European traders exploited these rivalries, offering better prices guns or deals to whoever had captives to sell. The Ashanti would arise out of the necessity to protect themselves from powerful rivals and eventually embrace the very systems they once resisted. The Ashanti Empire didn't rise out of peace. It rose from rebellion and war. In the late 1600s, a leader named Osei Tutu emerged to challenge the dominance of the powerful Denkira Empire, which had long forced smaller Akan states into tribute and subjugation. Osei Tutu unified the fractured Ashanti clans and used as sacred symbol the golden stool to bind them under a new national identity. But unity came with conquest. Osei Tutu defeated Denkira at the Battle of Faiese in 1701, and from that moment, the Ashanti were no longer subjects. They were empire builders. The Ashanti state was organized, efficient, and ruthless. Power flowed from the center. Loyalty was rewarded. Rebellion was punished. Entire towns were razed for refusing tribute. Rival leaders were executed and their people enslaved. The empire's strength came not just from gold, but from fear. As European demand for enslaved labor grew in the 1700s, the Ashanti responded with brutal efficiency. They launched war after war, not for land, but for captives. Victories against Akem, Gonja, and Techiman produced thousands of prisoners who were paraded in chains, sold to European traders, or forced into Ashanti servitude. Some worked in agriculture or infrastructure. Others were marched to the coast to die in dungeons before crossing the Atlantic. Ashanti elites profited immensely. Slavery wasn't just tolerated, it was central to state power. The empire taxed the slave trade, regulated it, and built a bureaucracy around it. European goods, especially guns, flooded in, making future conquests even easier. The Ashanti enslaved rebels, neighboring tribes, and sometimes their own. They used terror, intimidation, and public executions to maintain control.
Don't cry for me, Carolina. We've come too far to go back home. Don't lie to me, Carolina. Look at what we have become. There's a song that they sing in the land of the free, while we stand with our heads on our hearts. Oh, the words that we weave to our world as it bleeds. Soldiers in line for the march. Carolina, there's blood